amor. Join me. Oh, Miki Hashem Elokeinu Hamagdil Hashem Hamashmidi Oleras Bashamayim Ovaharetz Oimekimi Oimeavada Oimeashpois Yarimevyo So the Chaim Chevra don't have much of a voice. Been having a problem with my voice lately. But b'siyata d'shmaya, I just wanted to learn a little bit with you to enable us to tap into the unbelievable spirit that's enveloping us, this time that we're in now, this opportunity that's surrounding us. What a privilege. What a privilege. What is this time? What are we supposed to be focusing on? What are we supposed to be working on? What does it mean, this Rosh Hashanah that all of us are familiar with? Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li. Why now? And how does it connect to and culminate in Rosh Hashanah? And so I'd like to begin with the parable, with a mashal, a story from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, Miberditchev Schus Yagnaleinu Kedushas Levi. Where the Berditchever tells of a king that went hunting one day on his own, by himself. Didn't bring anybody with him. He wanted some alone time. He wanted to get out and mull over all the difficulties that he was faced with in terms of running his kingdom. And he went out alone. He took his hunting supplies. And sometimes even kings, when they go out, they don't dress like kings per se, right? And they can put on their hunting gear and they can go out dressed for that occasion. And he traveled into the forest and he spent a bunch of hours by himself, thinking deeply about all that he had to think about as the king, all the cheshbonos, all the different details of the melucha. And when it came time to head back to the palace, he suddenly realized that he become so deep in thought that he honestly had no idea how to get back. And here you have a king who's the most powerful person in the whole kingdom, who's rendered powerless because he simply doesn't know the directions back to the place where he belongs, back to his pedestal, back to his home. And so he immediately began to look for people who he could ask to guide him back to the palace. And he's walking in the forest, vagabonds that are living there, the hobos, homeless people, broken people, cynical people, lowly people. And he bumps into a group of these chevra that are hanging out there, that built their little shed and their little clubhouse out there in the forest, and they're living there on tattered blankets and dirt floors. And he asked them, he says, listen, can you help me? And he said, what's going on? What's the problem? He said, well, listen, I'm the king, and I got lost, and I need you to point me back in the way of the palace. And the concept of the king getting lost and the king happening upon their shack and talking to them, the most powerful person speaking to the most lowly people, was so unbelievable to them and fantastical that they laughed in his face. And they said, you can bother somebody else, we don't believe you for a moment. And he's trying to convince them. He says, listen, I'm the king of this whole place. Like, I'm the king. And he doesn't have any identification. He has no way of proving it to them. They never saw the king. He says, please, can you show me the way back to the palace? Nothing. They refused to help him. He's wasting their time. And so he goes on broken in search of somebody else who maybe can help him. And this happens again and again and again. And the sun is setting lower and lower in the sky. And finally, as it's about to literally become dark to the point that you can't see in front of you, and the king is terrified, he's not made for this, he happens upon one person that's on his own, without a chevra, standing outside his little shack, deep in thought. And the king walks over to him and he says, listen, I know this is going to sound crazy, and I know that you're probably not going to believe me, but I need to tell you the truth. I'm the king, and it's getting dark out, and I have nowhere to go, and I don't know where I am, and I'm yearning to be back in my palace where I belong. Can you please show me the way? And like the Gemara says, Nikarim divrei emes, sometimes when a person's really telling the truth, you can sense it, even if the person can't prove it. And something echoed within the beggar's heart to say, you know something? I believe him. I believe him. And he had the sensitivity both not to be completely bowled over by being in the presence of the king, and also not to mock and not to belittle and to say how crazy this is, you're the most powerful person, you get lost. And he had sympathy for him, and even empathy for him, himself having wandered in the world and perhaps still not having found his place. And he took the king by the hand and he said, I'll gladly show you the way back to the palace. And he started to walk, and it was a long ways back to the palace. And they're walking in the dark, and the beggar, he can't either see in front of him, but he knows this place. He knows this place. This is his place. And he knows every rock, and he knows every path, and he knows every up, and he knows every down. And they're walking their way back to the palace. And on the journey, on the derech, they get to talking. And remarkably, they have a lot in common. And they have a lot of the same sort of thoughts, a lot of the same sort of experiences in terms of an inner journey that the king has taken and that this beggar has taken. And they speak about the ultimate questions, and they become fast friends. And they finally come to the outskirts of the palace grounds, and the king is completely overwhelmed with gratitude. He just doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know how to thank this person. And not necessarily because it's an expression of gratitude in as much as they really became friends. He tells him, he says, listen, he says, you're not going back to the forest. He says, I need you by my side. And I'm going to go ahead and upgrade you and to lift you up, to lift you to the second in command, to the highest place. You're going to be next to me. And the person can't believe it. He's astounded at his luck, at this change of mazel. And in a second, of course, he agrees. What's the question? But the problem is he's all dirty. He's filled with mud and dried leaves on his back, and he's disheveled and he's overgrown. And so the king says, we're going to need to change you. We're going to need to give you a haircut and shower you, and you need to be mechavedik to come to be at this stature. And so they take off his old dirty clothes. They replace it with a beautiful outfit, and they clean him up and they trim him up, and he enters into the place where he's going to be working, this huge office right next to the king's throne room. And it's an amazing thing. And his old clothes, what do they do with them? They put them in a chest somewhere and they leave them somewhere, forgotten, dirty as they were, and just. That's the way that he came into the palace. Years and years and years he serves faithfully, and he becomes even closer and closer and closer to the king. And then one day something terrible happens, and some sort of crazy evil inclination enters him, and he sells some state secrets to the kingdom's enemy, behind the king's back. And he does something that's obviously going to completely and entirely corrupt the relationship. And the king is beside himself. He doesn't know what to do. This is his best friend. This is his confidant, his advisor. But the law is the law. Nobody's above the law, as the Democrats like to remind us. Nobody's above the law. And so execution is in store for this person. I mean, that's capital punishment, selling state secrets, treason. And a trial is set, and the proofs are presented, and they're going to sentence him to death by hanging. And the day comes that they're walking this person up to the gallows. And the noose is around his neck. And like by all executions, at least in the stories, they give this person one last request. What's your one last request? What do you want done for you right now, literally in the last moment? I think even in America, in capital punishment, people on death row get to eat like this meal, I think, beforehand. Something like that. The last request. And he thinks for a moment, very deeply. And he says something incredibly strange. He says, I happen to know that there's a certain chamber where there's a chest where you kept the clothes that I was wearing when I first came to the palace. You kept those dirty clothes, you kept them there. And I would like to change out of my prisoner clothes, whatever he was wearing, and I'd like to put on those clothes to be the same way that I was when I came in, when this whole parsha began and started. Strangest thing they ever heard, but a last request is a last request. Then they take the noose off and they change him, and he gets back up with the noose around his neck. And as literally they're about to go ahead and pull the thing and it's all over, all of a sudden they hear an ear-splitting cry that splits the heavens and shakes the silence. And everybody turns their heads, and it's the king. And the king begins to scream. The Hebrew equivalent, Yedidi Ayakar, my beautiful friend, my wonderful friend. What's going on here? What are you doing up there? What are you doing up there? You're my confidant. You're my closest, dearest friend. Come down, come down. This is madness. This is insanity. You're all I have. What had happened was that the king, seeing his friend dressed the way he was when he initially helped him and showed him the way back to the palace, was so powerful to awaken within those deeply dormant feelings of closeness and of gratitude and of yearning and of longing and of that ultimate salvation that was gifted to the king from this lowly person. And he came down and was reinstated to his position. Says the Kedushas Levi, this is a long and elaborate mashal for shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah. And we're coming to the point. The master of the world was lost, Kiviyachal. He was trying to find a place. He was trying to find a home. I once told somebody, and I think it's true, that if you think about the most sensitive, most emotional person, the most emotional person that you know, sensitive, caring, feeling, can't hear about a person being killed, Rahman al-Islam, and just go and keep on scrolling, impacts him or her. Sensitive person. Do you think that God is not at least as sensitive as that person? Do you think God is not at least as sensitive as all of the most sensitive people that ever lived, compacted and compounded into one moment? Do you think that all of the sensitivity that emerges from the Chelek Elokami Mal that we have, these little shards of godliness that are expressing themselves as we sit here listening, as I sit here speaking, you don't think that that all leads back to this infinitely sensitive being, to this infinitely caring being, to this infinite being that just as the most sensitive person would feel, wandering, lost in a wasteland, yearning for a place, yearning for a home, you don't think that God feels that infinitely? That we should have mercy on him? That we should like the pasuk says, Rachamecha Rabim Hashem, and Rabbi Nachman and the Baal Tanya both say it's not simply that God's mercy is great, but Kavalt Rachamecha Rabim Hashem, we have so much Rachmanas on you, Hashem. A nebuch that you created this world, and we can't find you a place to be. We can't create for ourselves that our little lives and our homes and our relationships with our spouses and our children and our community and our friends, that those shouldn't be little temples where your presence rests, that presence of peace and that presence of holiness. So God was lost in the world, and he went around from nation to nation to nation, all the beggars, and he's asking them, each and every one of them, can you find me a home? Can you make for me a dwelling place in this world? What does it say in the Torah? The whole Maisa by Har Sinai. Don't kill. That's the thing we like to do. We're out. Don't steal. That's the thing we like to do. We can't manage it. And Am Yisrael went ahead and made for HaKadosh Baruch Hu this promise, this bris, this covenant, to say, Ribbon Shalom, we're going to turn this world into a beautiful place. All the ingredients are here, Chevra. It's like standing in front of a counter with all the proper ingredients trying to make a cake, and going ahead and pouring all of the wrong measurements of all the ingredients and then complaining that we don't have what it takes to make a cake. And you have the ingredients, you're just not putting in the right amount of each. All the pieces are in place, and I'll tell you a secret, all the pieces have forever been in place for this world to be a perfect place, to be a wonderful place. There are vices that are built into our being that we have to fight against. Sans those vices, were people literally living with an other focus, were people literally living with this perception of godliness and of this mission, we would have been in utopia a long time ago. And at that moment, there was a kol gadol, there was a shofar that blew, kol gadol yasaf. And it's still echoing today in the world. And this is the shofar of freedom. And this is the shofar of exuberance. And this is the shofar that's announcing the king. And it's called Gadol Yasav because the king is ever approaching. Like the tzaddikim taught us, no matter how it looks that the world is regressing and things are getting worse, and look around, look at the politics, look at the history, look at what's going on. We're in a pretty bad state. Bechitzonius, but Bepinimius, things are happening. There's an awakening. We don't know how to channel the energy yet, technology. We don't know what to do with it yet, but there's tremendous energies in the world. And we're learning, and we're refining, and it's always a process of tikkun. And we go too much to one extreme, and then we go too much to the other. But we learn, we become refined. Things are coming toward tikkun. And that's the Kol Gadol V'lo Yasaf that's blowing so beautifully in this world, if you can open your ears to hear it. And that in the mashal is those dirty clothes of the beggar. That's the way we were dressed. But what happens, like the Rambam tells us, that throughout our lives, and throughout the mundanity of our weekdays, that ultimately has an effect to make our Shabbos mundane and prevent us from tapping into the Me'ein Olam Haba of Shabbos in the purest state that Shabbos is supposed to be the most spiritual time of the week, not the time to simply sleep and eat, and it should be the least holy as ultimately it can become. But that our week should be sanctified, and therefore Shabbos should be elevated, and therefore the next week should be sanctified, and it should be a never-ending continuum of elevation. But we become distracted and we lose our way. And when we lose our way, God loses his way. When we lose our way, Kiviyachol, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in accordance with the will that he had, for us to choose to draw him down, like the Kutzker said, where is God wherever you let him in? We do something to sever that relationship. We do something to become distracted to the point that we forget about our mission, that we're sent to this world to find God a place. And ultimately we're sentenced. And ultimately, we're going to face the repercussions. It's not a perfect mashal, of course. But this is what we feel like sometimes coming into Rosh Hashanah. This is what we feel like sometimes coming into Elul, as if we're guilty as charged. And says the Holy Berditchever, when we come to that moment on Rosh Hashanah, and we're given one last chance to speak up, you know what we say? We say, give me a shofar. We say, let me go ahead and envelop myself with the same garment and with the same energy that was present at our Sinai when this whole story started. And by blowing the shofar, we're reminding HaKadosh Baruch Hu of that moment that we made a covenant with him, that we swore we'd never break, and that Bepinimius we never broke. That at that moment that we stand there, we tie the beginning back to the end, to say that no matter how distant this journey may seem, and how distant we may seem now from our starting point, we're blowing the shofar each and every year in Rosh Hashanah to say that we still got it, and we're still with it. What a miracle we are. What a miracle it is that we're standing here at the end of time, after 2,000 years of persecution and of yearning and of longing, and like I mentioned in the beginning, Higanu. We're here. Anybody with eyes is able to see that this is miraculous. There are problems. It's not perfect. But we're closer now than we ever were before. That's some 200 feet from the Makam HaMikdash. We have Kolalim that are learning Kachim. That we have Machon HaMikdash that has already all the vessels that they could possibly make in the Big Day Kuhuna, and that there are people who know how to go ahead and bring this baby home. So we blow the shofar to remind ourselves, and to remind the king that we're still on his team, and that we still have this relationship with him that can never be broken, and that we become distracted, but that's not really what we're all about. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov revealed many Torahs, obviously, many different lessons that had to do with many different parts of the year. When it comes to Elul, there is one lesson in Breslov that everybody's learning, which is Torah Vav and Likutei Moharan, the sixth lesson in Likutei Moharan. And I bless us all that we should be able to learn it Be'i and Rav, and to continue to learn it again and again and again. Hafach ba v'afach ba de kula ba. And without getting into the complexity of the whole thing, I'm just going to read you one line, and then we'll explain it and we'll sing a lot more. B'siyata d'shmaya, all with the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is how he begins. Ki tzarich kol adam lema'it b'chvod atzmo. Each and every one of us rightfully needs to try as best as we can to minimize our own egotistical honor. And again, this doesn't mean to go ahead and to bury our head into the sand and to make it as if we're the lowliest people in the world, but it just means to channel our energies, that it shouldn't be for self-gratification and it shouldn't be for our own interests. And to do everything we can to have this consciousness that we're in this world to increase the honor of God. What is this word kavod? What is this word kavod? One of the most beautiful and I think really, honestly, genuinely accurate translations of kavod is the English word presence. Presence. You're ever in a room or a party or an event or simcha and everybody's eating and drinking and making small talk and someone with presence comes into the room and everybody feels it. There's a change in energy, there's a shift. The person didn't speak, he didn't say anything, he didn't do anything. But you know that he's here. You know that she's here. Can you define that, what that is? How many measures of presence this person has? Undefinable, it's unquantifiable. But it's undeniably there, it's undeniably real. Could you imagine what it would be like if we felt God's presence in the world? If we lived our lives with the perception that there's an other that's here, and that should inform and that should influence all of our actions and all of our thoughts. If we could be conscious of that presence, can we point to it? Not yet. Be'ezer Hashem, very soon. We're going to point with our fingers and see Him very soon. It'll be revealed. But to perceive the presence of God, that presence is the bechina of Malchus, of the kingdom, of the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's always connected to God's Malchus, as the pasuk says, Kfod Malchuscha Yomeru. And that word Yomeru is super important because that word Yomeru means to speak. That the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the presence of the Master of the world, which is His Malchus, which is His kingship, not in this belittling and limiting way that we're slaves and servants, how silly, but what we're part of, what this world genuinely is, no matter how much they ignore it, no matter how much they try to tell us that it's not. Like I always tell people, and I spoke about this just last night, and I've been speaking about it a lot lately because it's important, I believe, that Orthodox Jews, of whatever shade and whatever along the spectrum, were viewed by the world as conformists, like the ultimate conformists, right? Our lives are governed by all these rules and the nitty-gritty of Talmudic and halachic law. And when we think of these just rule followers, conformists, it's the Orthodox Jews. I don't think any other religion has as many laws. But Chaver, the truth is, if we'll allow ourselves to adopt this mindset, there is no bigger group of rebels than the Orthodox Jews. To be able to stand up and to put on tefillin in the face of a world that is trying valiantly to convince us that there's no being to whom we're held accountable. To be able to light Shabbos candles in a world of spiritual darkness. To be able to wear tzitzis. To be able to learn Torah. To be able to daven against overwhelming influences from the outside world, that what we're doing is madness and insanity and we've devoted our lives to it. You know what rebels we are, what holy rebels we are? And that our Yiddishkeit shouldn't simply be, okay, we're following the rules because we were born into it or because we've eased into this sort of mahalach. But just like the most rebellious teenager wants to leave everything aside and focus all of his energies on this rebellion, each of us need to wake up in the morning with this mandate, with this mission, that we're on the team, that we have in our hearts this shudder of God's presence. We can't see Him, we can't prove it, we can't point to it, but we feel it, it's there. And that's Kvoid Malchuscha Yomeru. Because we don't see this world as being some sort of divine stutter, where things are incoherent, or even worse, where there's radio silence from the other end. But like the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh taught, one of his most foundational teachings that you can see in the Baal Tanya, in the first chapter of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, based on the pasuk in Tehillim, Bidvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu, with the word of God, heavens were created, and David HaMelech goes on to say, La'olam Hashem Dvarcha Nitzav B'Shamayim. Eternally God, your words echo in the heavens. Says the Baal Tanya based on the Heilige Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, which really informs all of the other teachings of the Baal Shem and the Hasidic perspective on life. Is that those very letters, Yehi Rakia, represent the soul of this heaven that's spread out above us. That when a Jew looks up at Shemaim, he doesn't see clouds, and he doesn't even see stars, and he doesn't see the firmament, but he sees the echo of these words, Chevra, Yehi Rakia. That it's not pashitly that God just created the world thousands of years ago and it is what it is, and He spoke it into being, whatever that means. God is continually speaking the world into being. Thanks for coming. He is communicating with us. Some people have said that God is silent. There's nothing louder than God. We're surrounded by the echo of His communication. Who told you that God speaks the way that I speak to you? This is how God speaks. This is His manifestation. Kvod malchuscha yomeru. To be able to look at the stones and to see the Hebrew letters Aleph, Beis, Nun. To be able to look at the ground and to see that spiritual level of domim, of inanimate life that's connected to the letter Hey, of Yud Kei Vav Kei, that last Hey. To be able to look at another human being and to see the letter Yud shining. And like the Balata, and like the Noam Elimelech tells us, to see a human being's two eyes and nose, and to see a letter Yud, and a Vav in the middle, 26 Shem Havaya. We get used to it, so we think we're not miraculous. We get used to it, so we think we're not godly. This is totally miraculous. Like, this is a miracle what's happening here. And our Judaism and our experience of Judaism is going to depend on how perceptive we allow ourselves to be to the miracle of living. And how perceptive we allow ourselves to be to the Kvod Malchuscha Yomeru, to the presence of God. And how we commit ourselves to be these holy rebels, to transform this place into a world that's inhabitable for Him. Kvod Malchuscha Yomeru. There's so much more to say, and I don't want to be too long. It's cold, and we came to sing. No, not for. I think one of the chevra people are rubbing their arms. Yeah, there you go. So it's chilly and it's cold, but I want to again thank you for being with me, and for allowing me to come to you. And I want to thank Jerry, and I want to thank the Holy Kehillah, this beautiful, wonderful group of Jews that are on this journey together. That are chaverim makshivim, that are listening friends even more than they're speaking friends, which is the deepest secret of friendship, is to be able to listen, to be able to hear each other, to be able to be there for each other, to be able to remind each other that we're walking the King back to His palace, and never to forget that all of our garments are sullied, that we're all broken and we're all battered, and we're in a very challenging period of time, and we're all going through our difficulties. But to remind each other all the time that that's our salvation. Because that's how God wants to see us. He wants to remember how we looked. How we looked. A broken nation brought out of Mitzrayim of no merit of their own. Halalu ovdei avadazar, halalu ovdei avadazar. Not deserving, but it's not about that. Shabbos is kfi v'kaima. It's not reliant on the Jewish nation. That's Shabbos. That's me'in olam haba. It's about those sullied garments. And so I bless us all that we should be zocheh, first of all, to learn together for many, many years to come. Siyata d'shmaya. And that we should teach each other. And that the more that I learn, the more I should teach you, and the more that you learn, the more that you should teach me. And that we should be zocheh to come into Rosh Hashanah a little bit more perceptive to the presence of God, to that presence, to the Kvod Malchuscha Yomeru, to be able to see the spirituality in everything, to be able to see the spirituality in each other, to be a little bit more patient, to be a little bit more sensitive to the needs of others, to be a little bit more focused on Laharbas b'chvoid hamakim, to increase God's presence in the world and to allow that to speak through us, to communicate through us, and thereby to make this world a little bit of a brighter, more beautiful place. Siyata d'shmaya. Let's sing just a little bit more. Yeah, I'm going to plug it in again. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Jerry. And I want to thank David Sussman. Where is David?
He's on the way back from Ferry.
Okay, but I want to thank David. I want to thank Jerry for making this possible, for setting this up. Okay, join me.